Hi everyone, and welcome to your horoscope for the week of July the 5th, 2021. We have a really active, extremely powerful, intense sky where so very many things are going on at the same time. And this is one of those weeks where we have two very important celestial events that are game changers happening one after the other, or even better said, there is going to be a moment when they basically take place at the same time. One of them is the already active, extremely intense Saturn Uranus Mars T square. And this energy is going to get a little bit more intense because Venus is also going to be joining this party. She is also going to be holding this square along with Mars right at the beginning of the week. On the other hand, we have an energy of clarity, of choices, where that which we must do in a very practical, in a very down-to-earth manner starts becoming crystal clear. This is where we can truly work with whatever the Gemini solar eclipse, which took place on the 10th of June, is becoming that much obvious. It's almost like the eclipse stirred up so very, very many things inside of us. It is almost like having a jar half full with water and half with sand, and the eclipse just shook it up violently, and it took a lot of time for it to decant, for the sand to settle, and the water to become crystal clear. So our choices, and as I said, what it is that we have to do in a very practical, rational, down-to-earth manner to get where we want to be in life, to find ways to execute our future plans. This energy is coming online, but don't get me wrong, it's not an easy energy because Mercury will start squaring Neptune. So it is one where the disappointment, the disillusion, everything that has let us down emotionally, even spiritually, is way more helpful. And this is a little bit bittersweet because usually future plans should be fueled by motivation, by dreams, even by fantasies. But we do live in a age, in a period where it is exactly the emotional charge of everything might be a little bit way too excessive, in the sense that is there truly any truth in emotion under the present moment circumstances when the world, especially emotionally, is in absolute chaos? This is where we might have no choice but to stop ourselves, going up to the clouds, and this is where we have to just scratch off the rose-tinted paint from our glasses and just look at reality of what it truly is in the now, in the present moment. Stop believing promises, stop deluding ourselves, stop, basically aligning ourselves to false hope, even if, hope has a very strong spiritual charge, and in a very, philosophical way, of course it is based on a different kind of truth. It is based on something very positive. Neptune at the same time is unconditional love. It is the divine source. It is that as long as you dream it, as long as it exists within you, anything and everything is possible. But there are moments when karma itself, the world itself, physical reality itself, is not permissive of those dreams. So we have no choice but to, look reality in the eye and do the right thing for us personally. And as I said earlier, even though this is a little bit bittersweet, I don't believe that this is that painful as it was in those moments in the last 2 weeks, for example, when we really, really tried to decant the polluted water, so to speak. That was the moment when, our own plans, our own vision, our own thoughts, our social connections, friends, family, certain promises, everything that we found on the internet kind of disappointed us in a very bitter way. So we're over that. Now we are using this square, especially that Neptune is already retrograde, so we are embodying it. We know that the divine source is not really within our friends, families, and connections, but much more within ourselves. You know, they say that the divine works through other people, and that is the primary way that it kind of rearranges our lives and brings stuff, what we need in our lives, and that is absolutely true. But we live in a day and age where, you know, other people are so immersed in their own personal dramas, or even worse, in the collective drama, that the divine just cannot work with them, through them. And even if it does, because, you know, the path of least resistance, whatever we might get through them, well, it's not going to be even satisfactory at all. But even this is strictly personal, so to speak, because an eclipse doesn't really guarantee that we are going to make the right choice, not even for us personally. Some people will definitely choose to give even more power to the illusions, conspiracies, everything that, you know, is so very controversial right now. Some people will, of course, choose to live in their fantasies even more than they have done until now, but that is their own personal choice. Gemini is about duality. It is two sides of the same coin, so whatever we choose, if we choose balance or if we choose to work with what actually is real, then that is what we are going to receive. If we choose to work with something that is extremely Neptunian, then of course that is also what we're gonna get. So at the end of the day, this is also like a mental, intellectual, as in based on a person's mental and intellectual capacity, kind of natural selection. Some people are actually meant to drown in illusion because that is what's more real for them personally. And again, I repeat, as we start the week, as Mercury is conjunct the eclipse point, so where the sun and moon were on the 10th of June, whatever we need the most clarity with, well, it's gonna come to us. Of course, naturally first, whatever is not meant to us, whatever the wrong choices, whatever doesn't represent us, whatever isn't really good for us and won't serve our greatest good in the future, it will just not resonate and it will start getting weaker and fainter. We will just stop loving it, believing in it. You know, delusion will just fade away. And that is exactly the moment when practical solutions, the best ideas, really, really healthy advice, communication and help from other people, or it can simply be an epiphany, a sudden realization, the result of our own brainstorming is settling in. And as we're heading towards the end of the week, Mercury would have already progressed to the very last degree of Gemini, so it is out of shadow. And that might be a moment when we will feel ready to make the choice to enact whatever we have planned. And of course, that is also a moment when we are going to have like really healthy, reality-based communication. This communication can be like a feedback, an advice from other people. It can very well be like an official communication, especially if you're waiting on paperwork, documents, even contracts, even business. That might be a moment when you will have like a meeting or a negotiation discussion. So this will be a really good energy, resuming everything that Mercury retrograde kind of blocked. And if you might have suffered inconveniences or maybe were, a victim of deception during this Mercury retrograde period, this can be also a moment when You might find some kind of resolution with that, recover your losses, or at least find a way to set things straight for yourself. And from a psychological perspective, Mercury in Anaretic Gemini, it is the ruling planet of this sign. Well, it greatly emphasizes the true emotional and mental strength of Gemini. It can come through as a really strong empowerment, because one of the specific energies of Gemini, especially how it copes with really strong, heavy emotional energy or tough situations, it kind of has this natural ability to detach, make everything humorous, lighthearted. After all, Gemini is the adolescent of the zodiac. So it has this very strong ability not to take things seriously exactly when they are the most serious. But this isn't the Neptunian kind of escapism, because this doesn't truly represent escapism or not wanting to face reality. Not at all. This is almost like, one of the symbols of Gemini, the butterfly. Well, the butterfly has wings and can just elevate itself. It can soar up to the sky, to heights, and just look at the big picture. And from that position, when, it's not on the ground, it is not part of the problem, it can observe the problems, and through its mathematical and really ingenious brain power, it can just come up with the best possible solutions, even though sometimes they are a little bit unusual. But very many times it is exactly that unusual which really does the job. And at the same time, I do believe that this Gemini kind of lightheartedness, playfulness, the inner child becoming so very active, is gonna be a saving grace for us to be able to safely navigate through these really heavy T-squares. Because regardless of how we live it through personally, externally, globally, so to speak, well, it's gonna be really chaotic. And that is exactly what I'm going to be speaking about next. This really powerful T-square. Now, we already know so very well how it plays out externally. The political conflict, the economic instability, the clash of opinions, ideologies, rebellion, protest, demanding rights, trying to find truly almost like desperate solutions to the problems that we are facing as a collective. And when I say desperate, perhaps the innovative part is a little bit too much. Because, some solutions are so very future-oriented, even though they make sense and they're brilliant, they're amazing, they're visionary. Well, the world might not be prepared for something that very new. And yet, because Mars is an active part of this T-square, there is a very strong sense of urgency. We might feel that we don't have any time left, that we cannot wait anymore, that it has to be right now in the present, and we are willing to risk, we are willing to make really courageous and bold moves. This is one of the energies which brings a certain kind of sudden realization, and as I said, more collectively. This is where any kind of security and stability that obeying the rules and just being part of the big game can offer us is not worth it anymore, because we're not really living life out of the heart. Mars in the sign of Leo. It is all about the heart. It is all about our heart level desires, our freedom, feeling alive, tasting life, the adventure of life. If we don't have any of that, well, nothing that might be offered as a trade-off, as an exchange, won't be satisfactory. And of course, Leo is also the energy of a child, and people, as I said, collectively might be thinking, well, me personally, I can live with this, I can cope with this, but what about my children? I really, really don't want my children to have this kind of future. I want my children to be free. So this will be a very powerful game changer. And as I said, Venus also becomes part of this T-square. Venus is love. Venus is the divine feminine. Venus is everything that we would like to attract and have in our lives. It is also an energy of attachment, yes, especially in the sign of Leo. And there is going to be a moment when Venus and Mars are conjunct together. Not exact yet, but they're very close to each other. And, together they are part of this T-square. Mars is the male principle, Venus is the female principle. And when these two unite in the sky, that is always a very strong power of love, of attraction, of creation. And, the sign of Leo, it is self-expression, it is the self, it is the heart, it is even the ego. It is basically, I matter too. My individuality, the person who I am, small or big, significant or insignificant. I may be a drop in the infinite ocean, but even that drop which I am matters as well. So, this is an extremely strong emotional fuel. And both of these planets together, Venus and Mars, are gonna oppose Saturn. Saturn is the rules, restrictions, the traditional, the safety which is kind of forced on us. And in the sign of Aquarius, it can also represent the ways of society, the customs and tradition, and even the unwritten rules of society. And when the heart opposes it, the heart of the people, well, this will change a lot of things. And another expression of this energy is all about money, currency, Venus. And Venus is also the ruling planet of Taurus, and that is also about money value system, squaring Uranus in her home sign, instability, chaos, up and down spikes, the unpredictable. So this can also change a lot of things. And this is where maybe what we feel on a heart level, what we truly love, might be one of the forces or nuances which will change everything. Like, for example, Venus opposing Saturn. We simply withdraw our support because we no longer love something. We no longer agree to something. And Mars is the planet of action, so we take action. But sometimes the action is actually by stopping our support. For example, if people want to bankrupt a massive supermarket chain or anything, a big company, they stop buying. So one of the expressions of this energy is going back to the roots. Also, another nuance which highlights this is the sun in the sign of Cancer. So people will focus all of their attention, financial power, money, love, emotional support onto local farmers, local produce, people who belong to their local communities and they are, farmers, in anything, in any industry with anything that has to do with exchange. And this can be a really strong gesture which kind of forces change, like it or not. And at the same time, Uranus in the sign of Taurus is also technology. And technology is absolutely wonderful. I don't really have to hold a rhetoric about how much technology can improve our lives. But what if a lot of people stop loving it, stop seeing its utility, and just say, I had too much of this, let's just go back to simple things. And this is also one of the ways that, for example, a social media platform can instantly collapse because people just stop using it. Now, another kind of totally different expression of this energy has to do with the Earth in its physical form and climate. Well, this is already something that we are seeing in the present moment. So this is just continuing. The weather phenomenon, the great storms, the power of the wind, the shaking of the earth, Uranus and Taurus. And then there is Mars in Leo squaring Uranus, so that means heat waves, that means explosion, that means fire, that means accidents, that means basically the destructive force, or better said, the disruptive force of all of the elements put into one place, basically, because we have this very strong assertive fire energy, then we have Uranus and Taurus, the disruption of the earth element, but we also have Jupiter and Neptune retrograde in the sign of Pisces, and that, is the excess of water. Then we have Saturn in Aquarius air sign, the ruling planet of this sign, squaring Uranus, the co-ruler of the same sign, and that means the air as well. So basically it's almost like an elemental storm manifesting or playing out however it possibly can, depending on the region and its specifics. So anyway, this means a great imbalance, and naturally this can also mean man-made disasters, accidents, unfortunate events. Like for example, in my country, this played out as massive unbearable heat wave, followed by tornadoes and storms which we have never ever seen in our lives, and then floods, very very destructive floods, and to top this up, explosions at oil refineries, and basically everything that has a destructive potential detonated. And of course this was mirrored in so very very many parts of the world, like forest fires, heat waves, storms, etc. So this theme continues. So as a sign of warning, in a very personal way, individually, be very careful what risks you take. This is not a good time, for example, for extreme sports of any kind. Whenever you are at work, respect health and safety rules, be diligent, be precautious, not paranoid, but just respect that which is rational and it can save your life or protect your well-being. So now that we have spoken about this, how it can influence us collectively, let's see a little bit individually. So without a doubt, this square represents some kind of crisis. It really, really depends on where these power players are in your personal chart, so which area of life clashes. It can mean a crisis financially, but of course when I say crisis, it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It is just unforeseeable. It is just basically something which suddenly happens and takes you out of your comfort zone, and it requires you to take action, to make changes, to make very quick choices and decisions. Mars in Leo, immediate action, listening to your feelings, to your heart, but at the same time having a very rational approach to this as well. So this really, really requires us to be our most diligent, our most mature selves. And, if we have some kind of mastery experience in anything, to use that. Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn is basically mastery obtained through hard work, repetition, and all of our sacrifices. So that energy is always and always helpful, regardless of how and in which way it plays out. It may not be professional for some people, as I said, depending on where all of this is in your chart. But there is life experience with love, emotional understanding, with family and family issues, how to manage money, finances, communication. So, anything applies to this. And of course, even though the Saturn and Uranus square is not going anywhere because it is the predominant aspect of 2021, so that means that all throughout this year, we can have these disruptions, inconveniences, unexpected twists and turns of events at any given moment. Fortunately, Mars and Venus are going to break up the square towards the end of the week, and especially going into next week. So at least the urgency, the intensity, and because they oppose Pluto, many times the feeling of cruelty, of having no power whatsoever over this, is gonna disappear. And another advice that I would like to give, as I always say, chaos and the unforeseen, the unpredictable, always has a chance to produce something beautiful, wonderful, something lucky. How many times have we experienced that an unfortunate or seemingly unfortunate event, a loss or a coincidence, actually guided us to something really, really good? So there is always that potential. Uranus with money and currencies and financial instability, it can mean loss, but it can also very well mean unexpected gain. Sometimes that gain does require us to get out of our comfort zones, but it can be something excessively good. And of course we might not have that much power over this because it's chaos after all, yet we do have power of making the choice if we want to grab this opportunity and work with it, or if we want to stay in our comfort zones. Yet another very interesting possibility that this energy can produce, well, it has much to do with two other aspects that are taking place at the same time. One of them is Mars standing very close to Venus in the sign of Leo, which is heart, which is love, passionate love, romantic love, attraction, everything that has to do with that. And there is an aspect, the Sun sextiles Uranus. And this can mean unexpected romance, meeting a person which is totally the unusual type, which you might not even dream of ever encountering, meeting, or having to do with them. And it can just pop up in your life, and unusual alliances, romantic connections, maybe unexpected help coming from unexpected people, or maybe sometimes total strangers can just shake up your life in the most pleasant sense. But of course, this also has a warning sign. Don't get immersed into it. Give it time. Work with it. Enjoy it, of course. And it makes you feel alive and excited and all of that. It's absolutely fine. But just be careful not to get way too carried away. And Sun sextiling Uranus, Sun in the sign of Cancer, of course. Well, this can play out as presents, as gifts, as financial help, for example, or any kind of help, or a surprise, a delight, coming either from someone from your past, from a family member, from someone who loves you deeply, even if it's not mutual, even if it's a total surprise, even if you weren't aware of this. It can also play out as a love declaration, which you totally weren't expecting, or perhaps if you had relationships in the past where the bridges were burned, so to speak, that person might just pop up in your life unexpectedly and offer you something which might even blow your mind. And from a very non-so-personal way, it can just be a lucky event. This Sun and Uranus sextile can also be a very karmic energy which actually guides you to a new beginning or to a really positive change in your life. Because besides the T-squares, the highlight of next week is definitely going to be the new moon taking place in the sign of Cancer. So the conjunction of the Sun and Moon is going to be holding the sextile with Uranus. So that can be a very pleasant surprise, which can play out in so very many different ways that guides you or somehow enables a wonderful, fantastic new beginning in that area of life where 18 degrees and 2 minutes of the sign of Cancer falls for you personally. This new moon in the sign of Cancer is going to be taking place either on the 9th or the 10th of July, depending on where you are on the planet. And besides this sextile with Uranus, it's also going to be holding a trine with Neptune, and it will naturally oppose Pluto. But none of these celestial conversations is exact, so they're not exact by the degree, which means that these influences can be quite gentle. And when I say gentle, sometimes even a Pluto opposition can be, let's say, non-dramatic, because usually whenever Pluto opposes a planet, well, it kind of nullifies the power of that planet. But this is where it might not necessarily be something negative, because this is a new moon after all. So the opposition to Pluto might just represent that it's not 100% in our own hands, this new beginning. It might be fated, especially if there is some kind of giving up, loss, surrender, or a moment where we feel powerless attached to it. Well, that is maybe positive, because where we do not have power, the hand of faith and, karma can have that much more power, and it can just push us in the right direction. And this push in the right direction can also represent the sextile with Uranus, where all that we need to do, because a sextile does involve action or any kind of intention setting from our behalf. So this action can just represent us wanting to embrace the new and wanting to basically work with what life gives us, offers us, rather than to obsessively ask for things to turn out the way we think it's best, etc. And then there is the trine with Neptune, that is a deeply spiritual energy, that is hopeful, that has a lot to do with the healthy expression of spirituality, where regardless of what happens, we feel guided, we feel supported, we feel as if the pieces of the karmic puzzle, for us personally of course, are falling into place. And also Neptune retrograde, that the spirit works through us, our intuition, our resonance, our soul, and not as much externally. So this is such a good energy, because it also means that at this time we're able to detach from any external spiritual influence. For example, whatever is shared on social media, all the controversy, all the BS that is being shared out there. This is where you might decide that, look, I'm perfectly capable to decide what all of this means for me personally. I have a connection with the divine from an individual perspective. Do I need the opinion? Do I need the interpretation? Do I need the help or the influence of anyone, when I am perfectly able to ride the spiritual flows, whatever they are, on my own accord, and what it means for me strictly personally? And this is also the symbolism of Cancer, the hermit crab, our own personal shells, which is a symbolism of our self-love, self-nurture, self-care, of our own emotional resilience, endurance, having the power to make ourselves happy, and more importantly, knowing that feeling happiness, feeling joy, feeling pleasure is so very important for a healthy existence in any way, shape or form, even spiritually, even physically, in any way. And also from a strictly collective perspective, Cancer and a new moon, it is the people. It is the unity of people, the solidarity of people, especially, where they share the same culture, the same ancestral heritage, the same ancestors, It is basically the emotional and psychological element of what a community is formed of. And the opposition to Pluto, well, it can represent a certain kind of unpleasant truth where, in order to preserve your ancestral values, your community, the distinctiveness, the cultural, spiritual, whatever distinctiveness of where it is that you belong, well, you have to have boundaries. You have to not accept foreign influences, or even if you accept, there are boundaries, there are limits, there are borders that simply cannot be crossed. And Cancer is also an energy which has a lot to do with the past, so maybe issues from the very, very distant past are going to resurface. For example, what a certain culture did to the ancestors of another culture, old ancestral wounds, or in countries which have like a very multi-cultural, multi-ethnical composition, a greater sense of equality is gonna be demanded. Uranus is the planet of equality, liberty, and ultimately fraternity. And from a personal perspective, well, the sign of Cancer has also much to do with your home, with your house, with your, let's say, symbolically speaking, sacred temple. So for some people, this can be a new beginning where they move to another place or move back to their place of birth, place of origin, country of origin. This is where they might leave a shared accommodation, and this might be the symbol of the opposition to Pluto, where Pluto is a termination, an ending, and transformation. But it doesn't have to be doom and gloom or bad or sad. Quite the contrary. It is freedom. It is the moment when you have to just leave a shared accommodation and just start something for yourself. And it can be quite positive. And even if it's like leaving the family home, your family can be very, very happy for you and they can help you and support you. Yes, it will change the way everyone lives, but ultimately, it's something really positive and fantastic. It can also represent an upgrade of your home, a redecoration maybe, or it can actually represent where if you are in an established bond but don't live together, you might decide to move in together. Mars and Venus stand close together in the sky, and this usually happens once every 2 years, and it marks the Venus-Mars cycle of the next 2-year period. So it always means some kind of union. And because they're so close together at a new moon in Cancer, it can mean moving in together, realizing that you guys love each other so much, and that you are not just able to coexist with each other, but greatly add value to each other's lives by living together. So you might make this choice to move in together, or buy a house together, rent out a home together, or maybe move to a totally new place together and start a new life. Now, if it comes to big aesthetic and artistic, let's say, upgrades to your house, this is where it's absolutely wonderful, it's innovative, sextile to Uranus. But, as a word of advice, be careful not to do something which you cannot change anymore. As in, be sure not to knock out walls and make structural changes in your home, because you might regret it later on. So an aesthetic upgrade is absolutely fantastic. By all means, try out new things, everything that might delight you. Just be sure to be able to undo it when it no longer serves you. And last but not least, the sign of Cancer has a lot to do with motherhood. It is the sign of the mother. It is the home of the moon, after all. and the moon is in her home sign, the new moon, and it also means a new beginning. And this is where the union of Mars and Venus in the next sign, Leo, being very close to exact at this time of the new moon, well, it can mean that some couples decide to have children. It can be a great time for fertility. It can be a really good time, to settle down with someone and just establish a family. Especially if you have a history together and time and everything that you went through together proved and showed without a shadow of a doubt that you can coexist with each other, and you have what it takes to have a serious and stable, committed alliance and relationship in your lives. And naturally the trine with Neptune and with Venus being in the sign of Leo, it means artistic energy, creativity, self-expression. So this is a really, really wonderful, uplifting, dreamy and inspirational energy for artists. And from a strictly artistic perspective, Neptune and Jupiter, even though they're retrograde, they're still in the sign of Pisces. And these are the two ruling planets of this sign. And as I said, retrograde means that the symbolism turns inwards. So it can be so much inspiration, especially with music, with poetry, painting, decoration, having a very, very deep artistic vision, and not just dreaming it up, but also being able to hold that vision, hold the inspirational vibes until you can basically birth something out of it, something beautiful, something truly magical, like a big masterpiece. And even if you're not a professional artist, it's the same thing really. It doesn't matter if you're amateur or professional, if you have any studies or not. Uranus can just simply represent that spontaneous inspiration, that great epiphany. And the square with Saturn is actually something positive in this context, because Saturn is the gatekeeper. It is basically where you need diplomas, degrees, experience, friends in high places. And Uranus might just skip all of that, where it just gives you the inspiration, the epiphany, and the chance, and you create something absolutely beautiful and wonderful, which just gets you recognition, appreciation, and you just fill the world with beauty and a piece of your soul. Well, this concludes this week's horoscopes. Thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you found this useful and it managed to inspire you just a little bit. And once again, please remember health and safety rules. Do not take risks, especially when your physical safety and health is involved. The Mars, Uranus and Saturn T-square are gonna represent assertion, violence, sudden eruptions and outbursts of anger. Especially on the world stage where crime rates are gonna skyrocket. And we will see a lot of violence at play, regardless if it's physical, if it's like very subtle, for example, psychological. You must ultimately remember this. That is not your life. That is not your world. You are living in the same world, but you're not of the world. You're here to experience your story, and your story, there is absolutely no reason why it has to have any correlations with what's going on out there. So please stay detached and just remember that you have everything that you need within you to make your story, your life, your reality as magical and as beautiful as you want. So there is no reason to take ownership of that which isn't yours and that which ultimately you have not created or co-created. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, bye for now.